Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into the world of Johannes Brahms. You know, that huge figure from the mid-Romantic era.
Absolutely. And when you see those portraits, you get this image, don't you? This serious, bearded master, all about structure.
Exactly. Often painted as the conservative one,
Yeah.
especially during a time of pretty radical musical change.
Right.
But what we want to do in this deep dive is, well, maybe shatter that image a bit. We want to get to the emotional truth underneath.
The tempestuous core.
Yes. The passionate, sometimes, cripplingly self-critical person behind that rigorous elegance.
We're looking for the inner conflict that really shaped his music, every single note.
So maybe we should start with his sound. His musical identity is key, isn't it?
It's absolutely fundamental because it's such a direct reflection of that internal conflict you mentioned.
Okay.
His signature style, well, it's got this incredible rhythmic vitality, a kind of muscular energy, you could say, and a very free, very expressive way of handling dissonance. He wasn't afraid of clashing sounds to create feeling.
So he was emotional, a radical even.
In many ways, yes, a radical emotionalist. But here's the paradox. He always channeled these really fiery, expressive moments within the traditional structures he inherited.
Okay. Like symphonies, concertos.
Exactly. Symphonies, concertos, sonata form. He worked inside the box, but he made the box feel much bigger, much more intense. He was synthesizing the past and present.
And drawing heavily on the past masters, too, right? Bach, Beethoven.
Yeah.
He was known for his counterpoint.
Oh, absolutely. He was a master of contrapuntal textures.
For listeners maybe not swimming in music theory daily, what does mastering counterpoint actually mean in terms of what we hear?
Okay, think of counterpoint like structured independence. It's the art of weaving several distinct melodic lines together at the same time.
Okay.
Each line keeps its own character, its own direction, but together they create this incredibly rich, coherent whole. It's not just chords stacked up vertically.
It's more horizontal.
Exactly. It's horizontal. Like listening to a complex, really emotionally charged conversation where multiple people are speaking clearly, but the whole discussion makes perfect structural sense.
Wow.
It gives his music that incredible depth, that feeling of inevitability almost, that coherence.
And that coherence, that structure, brings us right into the middle of that famous historical clash, the War of the Romantics. Because in his own time, especially compared to, say, Liszt or Wagner and their big programmatic ideas.
Right, the new German school.
Brahms was often seen as the conservative guy, the champion of absolute music just for its own sake, no story needed.
Precisely. He became the figurehead for those who believed music should evolve organically, structurally, not through, radical revolution tied to stories or poems.
He was the inheritor of tradition.
He was seen that way, yes. But here's where it gets really fascinating historically, because later on, composers like Arnold Schoenberg,
the father of atonality.
the very same. He championed Brahms as being profoundly progressive.
Progressive? Wait, that sounds like a total contradiction. If he was the traditionalist anchor, how could Schoenberg see him as progressive? What did they miss back then?
Well, Schoenberg looked back with different eyes, obviously. He saw Brahms' really innovative approach to musical ideas, to motives, and how he developed them.
Okay.
Schoenberg specifically pointed to Brahms' use of what he called developing variation. And this idea is absolutely key to understanding Brahms.
Developing variation. Explain that a bit.
Okay, so unlike earlier composers who might state a theme and then repeat it fairly clearly, Brahms would take a tiny musical seed, just a rhythmic pattern or a few notes.
A small fragment.
Exactly, a small fragment. And he would constantly transform it, evolve it, grow it organically throughout an entire piece. It's not just repetition, it's constant evolution.
I see.
And Schoenberg argued that this technique, this constant organic development, was actually laying the groundwork for musical modernism. The idea that music constantly justifies itself and reinvents its own material.
So we have this genius, kind of bound by tradition, working in the shadow of these giants like Beethoven, yet absolutely brimming with this intense, dramatic, personal emotion that he somehow forces through this really rigorous, evolving structure.
That's the tension right there.
That internal battle, the fury and the elegance, that's really what we want to get at in this deep dive. We're looking at a man who was, by all accounts, deeply self-conscious, incredibly self-critical.
Severely so.
And who famously never married, apparently choosing to pour everything, all his emotional energy, into his art.
His journey, from that poor district in Hamburg to being this celebrated master in Vienna, it's paved with intense struggle and profound emotional sacrifice.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Let's trace those roots, that tension, right back to the beginning. Hamburg, 1833.
Right, the Gennevier quarter. Not exactly the posh part of town.
No, and this is where we first hit that conflict. Ambition versus, well, harsh economic reality.
It was definitely a humble start, financially precarious, for sure. But importantly, it was a musical household.
His father, Johann Jakob.
Yes, he was a professional musician. Played double bass, horn, flute. Quite versatile. And interestingly, he pursued music against his own family's wishes. So there was already a streak of artistic determination there.
And his mother, Johanna.
Johanna Henrika Christiane Nissen. She was a seamstress and quite a bit older than his father, 17 years older.
And the family really struggled.
Oh, definitely. The sources show they moved house frequently, always looking for cheaper rent. It was a constant financial pressure.
There was even that story about his father considering emigrating to the U.S.
Yes, apparently after an impresario heard young Johannes play and saw the prodigious talent. Promised them riches across the Atlantic. It shows you how acute the anxiety was sometimes.
That kind of scarcity, that instability, it must have left a mark, maybe instilled that lifelong seriousness about his profession?
You'd have to think so. And this environment sets up the first big internal conflict for Brahms himself. The unwanted calling.
What do you mean unwanted?
Well, he starts serious piano lessons around 1840 with Otto Kossel. But his talent for composing just bursts out almost immediately.
Too quickly for his teacher.
Apparently so. By 1842, Kossel is already complaining that Brahms could be such a good player, but he will not stop his never-ending composing.
So even as a kid, the creative drive was battling the practical need to just be a performer.
Exactly. And what's even more striking is the pushback he got at home about composing.
His parents disapproved.
Actively disapproved, it seems. They saw composing as, well, an unstable distraction. Performance was the safer bet, the way to actually earn a living.
They remembered the poverty.
They remembered the poverty. A brilliant pianist could make money. A young, unknown composer. Much harder. So Brahms had this incredible talent, but it was immediately channeled through very rigorous study, which paradoxically gave him his classical foundation.
And that grounding came largely from Edward Markson, right? Starting around 1845.
Yes, Markson is absolutely crucial. He's this amazing historical link. He wasn't just some local teacher. He personally knew Beethoven and Schubert.
Wow.
And he deeply admired the real cornerstones, Bach, Mozart, Haydn.
So Markson was the anchor.
He was the anchor.
Yeah.
He steered Brahms away from just, chasing the latest romantic fads. He made sure Brahms's composing was solidly grounded in that Viennese classical tradition.
He gave him permission to be traditional.
In a way, yes. Permission to see the masters not as museum pieces, but as living influences, as models to build upon. That's why when you look at Brahms' mature works, you hear that incredible structural coherence. It comes directly from Markson saying, study these scores, understand how they're built.
Even his early piano sonata, written when he was just 12.
Exactly. Formally structured, it shows that training took hold very early on.
Okay, before we move into his young adulthood, we kind of have to address that persistence story, that dark myth about his youth.
Ah, yes. The bars and brothels.
The idea that the teenage Brahms was forced to play piano in rough places, maybe even brothels, to help the family survive, it adds this gritty, dramatic layer.
It certainly does. It's a very pervasive myth, gives him this sort of tragic backstory. And Brahms himself might have even hinted at it later in life sometimes.
But modern scholars
largely dismiss it. The historical evidence just doesn't really stack up to support this picture of a destitute kid forced into shady work.
Why not? What contradicts it?
Well, first, while they definitely struggled, the family seems to have achieved, a decent level of relative prosperity, enough, crucially, to afford Brahms's quite demanding music lessons with people like Kossel and Markson.
Okay.
And perhaps more importantly, Hamburg law at the time was incredibly strict about these things. It explicitly forbade music in brothels or similar establishments, and it barred minors from even entering them.
So it seems unlikely.
Highly unlikely, given both their ability to pay for his education and the legal restrictions. It feels much more like a romanticized story, maybe built up later to heighten the drama of his origins. His actual foundation, musically and probably morally, was pretty solid, even if his parents wished he'd just focus on performing.
All right, so now we hit his 20s. And this is where things really accelerate, isn't it? The emotional world just explodes. These are the crucial, dramatic years that defined so much.
Absolutely. His path to recognition, though, it didn't start smoothly. It started with a pretty big rejection in 1850.
Right. He sent music to Robert Schumann.
The great Robert Schumann, composer, influential critic, and the package came back unopened.
Ouch. Just dismissed out of hand. A tough start for any young artist.
Brutal. But then, just 3 years later, 1853, everything changes. He goes on this concert tour with a Hungarian violinist, Ade Remenyi.
And this tour leads to two huge encounters. First, the violinist Joseph Joachim.
Yes, Joachim. And that meeting was apparently electric. Brahms played some solo pieces for him, and Joachim, even looking back 50 years later, said, "Never in the course of my artist's life have I been more completely overwhelmed."
Wow. That's some reaction.
It shows the sheer force of Brahms' musical personality hitting someone who was already a top-tier musician. And this immediate, intense connection sparked a lifelong friendship.
Though sometimes a rocky one, right?
Oh, very rocky at times, yes, but fundamentally deep. And their dedication was amazing. They even started this mutual training exercise in 1856, sending each other complex counterpoint exercises, canons, fugues.
Just to sharpen their skills together.
Exactly. It shows how seriously they took their craft and that classical foundation.
But that same tour also led to a breakup, didn't it, with Remenyi?
Yes, the Weimar incident. They visited Weimar, which was basically Franz Liszt's territory, the heart of the new German school.
Liszt, another giant.
And Liszt was actually very gracious initially. He sight-read Brahms' Scherzo, Opus 4, apparently magnificently. A real gesture, recognizing the talent.
But then
came the infamous moment during Liszt's own performance of his huge B-minor sonata. Remenyi claimed Brahms fell asleep, or at least looked like he did.
Oof. Was he just tired from touring, or was that a statement, a snub against the Liszt camp?
It's impossible to know for sure what was going through Brahms' head. But perception was everything in that highly polarized environment. Falling asleep, or seeming to, during a major premiere by the leader of the enemy camp, it was taken as a massive sign of disrespect. That, plus other tensions, led Remenyi and Brahms to split soon after.
So Brahms had kind of aggressively planted his flag in the traditionalist camp?
You could say that. And crucially, it was Joseph Joachim who then gave Brahms the connection he needed. A letter of introduction to Robert and Clara Schumann in Düsseldorf.
October 1853. This is the big one.
This is the absolute turning point. Robert Schumann was just completely bowled over by this 20-year-old. He dropped his other work and immediately wrote that famous article, New Bahnen.
New Paths.
New Paths. In his hugely influential journal, he basically anointed Brahms as the chosen one, the composer destined to give expression to the times in the highest and most ideal manner.
The ultimate endorsement. Career-making stuff.
Absolutely. Brighter than any spotlight a young composer had received in ages.
But this prophecy, it came with this immense psychological burden, didn't it? It almost confirmed his worst fears about perfectionism.
It was crushing, totally revealing. Brahms wrote back to Schumann almost immediately in November 1853, basically saying, "This incredible praise, it's going to create such huge expectations, I don't know how I could possibly live up to them."
He was terrified. Instantly.
Terrified of failing to meet Schumann's ideal.
And you can trace the consequences directly, can't you? This fear led him to destroy so much of his early work.
Devastatingly so. He was so afraid of releasing anything imperfect that he later burned piles of manuscripts, including reportedly 20 string quartets before he finally published his official first quartet.
20? That's not just editing, that's a psychological defense.
Absolutely. A defense against the weight of being hailed as the messiah of music, as some called him. It was just too much.
Around the same intense time, he collaborated with Schumann and Albert Dietrich on the FAE Sonata for Joachim, right?
Yes, based on Joachim's personal motto, Frei aber einsam.
Free but lonely. That feels incredibly prophetic for Brahms himself, doesn't it? Especially concerning Clara Schumann.
It really does. That motto hangs over his entire emotional life, which became so deeply entwined with Clara.
After Robert's breakdown, his suicide attempt in February 1854, and being institutionalized, Brahms basically moved in to help Clara, didn't he?
He did. He supported the household, managed communications with the asylum, became this incredibly close, supportive figure.
And developed very deep feelings for her.
Intensely deep feelings. He saw her as an ideal of womanhood. They formed this profound bond that lasted right up until her death decades later. And this is the huge conflict he resisted, making it a romantic relationship.
He chose to remain a bachelor.
He actively chose that path. The sources often frame it as him needing to focus solely on his art, but maybe also an inability to commit. To bear those fetters he mentioned later. He dedicated his Open 9 variations on a theme of Schumann to her in 1854, a musical expression of devotion. But in life, he kept a certain distance.
So this decade brings huge artistic validation, but also this immense personal complexity and burden. And then it closes with another major blow, a really public failure.
Oh, yes. The premiere of his Piano Concerto No. 1 in D minor, Hamburg, January 1859, what the sources call a brilliant failure.
He was the soloist.
He was the soloist, and the audience reaction was just hostile. She wrote to Joachim afterwards that the performance was a brilliant and decisive failure, adding dryly, but the hissing was too much of a good thing.
Hissing, wow.
And apparently, at a later performance in Leipzig, the reaction was so bad he had to be physically stopped from leaving the stage mid-performance.
That level of public rejection, the psychological impact must have been enormous. And it had professional consequences, too.
Immediate and severe. Breitkopf and Hertel, his main publisher then, basically said no thanks to his new compositions after that disaster.
So he lost his publisher.
He did, which forced him to find new outlets, eventually leading him to Simrock, who became his major publisher later on. It was a harsh lesson in how fickle audiences in the industry could be.
Maybe that sting contributed to his next public move, which also backfired. The 1860 manifesto against the new German school.
You have to wonder. Yes, he, Joachim, and a couple others drafted this statement, attacking Liszt and Wagner's followers. They condemned their musical approaches, their rejection of traditional forms, called their music rank, miserable weeds.
Strong stuff. They wanted to rally the traditionalists.
That was the plan. But the execution was a complete mess. A draft got leaked to the press before they had enough signatures.
Oh, no.
And the main journal of the enemy camp, the Neue Zeitschrift für Musik, published this savage parody that just ridiculed Brahms and his allies as dinosaurs. Completely out of touch.
Total humiliation.
Utter humiliation.
Yeah.
And the sources say Brahms never again ventured into public musical polemics. That failure taught him a final, decisive lesson. Fight your battles in the music itself, through the notes, the structure. Never again in the messy world of public opinion and manifestos. He retreated into his compositions.
Okay, so moving into the 1860s, Brahms has faced down public failure. He's navigated this intense emotional world around the Schumanns. He finally settles in Vienna in 1862.
Right. Vienna becomes his base.
In this period, it brings his first really big successes, but they seem to come at a very clear personal cost. The price of choosing that bachelor life becomes really evident.
Painfully evident. You see it starkly with his brief engagement in 1859 to Agathe von Siebel.
He broke it off very quickly.
Very quickly. It seemed to confirm his decision for isolation, for prioritizing his art above all else. He wrote to her later, quite candidly, "I love you. I must see you again, but I am incapable of bearing fetters."
Incapable of bearing fetters. Chains, ties.
Exactly. And he told a friend later that Agathe was his last love. He had made his choice. The solitary, relentless pursuit of composition over a conventional family life.
And that priority shows up professionally, too, doesn't it? With the Hamburg Philharmonic job he'd always wanted.
Oh, absolutely. He had really hoped for that conductorship in his home city. But he got passed over in 1862. It stung.
But then, years later...
Decades later. In 1893, they finally offered him the directorship. The ultimate irony.
And he turned it down.
He turned it down. He said he'd got used to the idea of having to go along other paths. By then, his independence, his creative freedom, was just more valuable to him than that kind of institutional recognition, even in Hamburg.
So Vienna is home, but composing is his only real master. He had that brief conducting stint there, though, right?
Yes, with the Wiener Sing Academy in 1863. And characteristically, he programmed challenging stuff early German masters like Schütz and Bach. Showed his deep scholarly side, his interest in alt music, old music.
But he didn't stick with it.
No. He resigned pretty quickly, found it took up too much precious composing time. Everything came second to that.
And it's during this period of, deliberate focus, maybe even self-isolation, but also fueled by a major personal loss, that he has his first absolutely massive breakthrough success.
A German Requiem, Opus 45.
Triggered by the death of his mother in February 1865.
Yes. The Requiem was just monumental. The full premiere in Bremen in 1868 was an immediate triumph. It cemented his reputation internationally. This was him arriving on the world stage as a composer of true profound depth.
But there's more to it than just being a religious work, isn't there? There's a strong humanist undercurrent.
Oh, very much so.
Right.
And this is often overlooked, but it's crucial. There's that story about the conductor Karl Reinthaler suggesting he add more explicitly Christian text.
And Brahms's reaction.
Brahms reportedly said he'd happily swap the word German in the title for human.
Wow.
And that he'd gladly get rid of specific biblical references like John 3.16, which is very central theologically. It points clearly to his acknowledged agnostic or humanist beliefs.
Highly unusual for such a grand spiritual work back then.
Absolutely. The Requiem is focused on comfort, on consolation for the living, dealing with loss, not on specific religious doctrine. It's about universal human experience. His friend Wojak apparently remarked on this later with some surprise. Such a man, such a fine soul, and he believes in nothing. He believes in nothing.
And the pain behind it. It wasn't just his mother's death, was it? Part of it went back further.
That's right. Part of the second movement, the funeral march theme, he'd actually sketched out way back in 1854, right after Robert Schumann's suicide attempt.
So the Requiem's triumph was layered. It was born from the sorrow of his mother's death, but also echoed that earlier trauma and loss surrounding the Schumanns. Multiple sorrows feeding into one masterpiece.
And speaking of sorrow and the Schumann circle, we have to talk about the relationship that probably caused Brahms the most intense romantic pain in his mature years.
Clara's daughter, Julie Schumann.
Yes. It's such a poignant story, perfectly capturing that theme of intense feeling constrained by his choices, by his structure.
It's heartbreaking because it was all unspoken, right? In 1869, he's 36, she's 24. He falls deeply in love with her.
Deeply. But true to his chosen path, his inability or unwillingness to bear fetters, he never declared himself. He didn't say anything. He just couldn't bring himself to disrupt his life, even for her.
And then she got engaged to someone else.
Yes, to Count Marmarito later that year. And Brahms's reaction, his confession of that loss, came through music, directly to Clara.
The Alto Rhapsody, Opus 53.
Exactly. He gave the score to Clara. It was his way of expressing the love he couldn't act on, the future he'd rejected, a musical substitute for the proposal never made.
And Clara understood instantly.
Completely. She wrote in her diary that Brahms called it his wedding song, and she noted the profound pain in the text and the music. It was just devastating, a veiled farewell to that kind of family life poured into his art.
That same kind of fierce discipline, that self-imposed limitation, also defined his long struggle with the symphony, didn't it?
Oh, the symphonic struggle is legendary. Yes. Even while he was having popular hits during this time, like the first set of Hungarian dances in '69 or the lovely Leibsländer waltzes.
Things people enjoyed immediately.
Right, accessible works. But the symphony, that was the Everest he was terrified to climb.
He started sketching his first symphony way back in 1855, just after the Schumann prophecy.
As early as that, yes. But it didn't actually appear until 1876.
21 years, a massive struggle with what he called the model of models.
He was utterly paralyzed by Beethoven's shadow. He famously said he could hear the giant marching behind him. It's why he approached his first symphony with such incredible, almost painful caution.
He called it long and difficult.
Long and difficult, not exactly charming. And crucially, he pointed out it was long and in C minor.
A direct nod to Beethoven's Fifth.
A deliberate, almost deferential nod. He knew he was stepping into the ring not just with a composer, but with the entire weight of symphonic history defined by Beethoven.
And his perfectionism didn't stop even after it was well received initially.
Not at all. Even after the premiere got a warm reception, he wasn't satisfied. He actually ripped out the original slow movement and wrote a completely new one before the score was published.
Just relentless.
Relentless pursuit of perfection. But the result of that 2-decade psychological battle, that creative labor, it was immediate recognition.
When it finally premiered in Vienna.
It was instantly hailed as Beethoven's 10th. That's the moment, really. The conflicted, self-doubting young man has finally climbed the mountain. He's become the master, channeling all that internal struggle into something rock solid and profoundly moving.
So we followed him from Hamburg's poor streets through those huge rejections, the burden of Schumann's prophecy, the self-imposed loneliness that cost him love. Pulling all this together, what does this deep dive really tell us about understanding his music? How did he fuse all these conflicting forces?
I think his greatness truly lies in that synthesis, both intellectually and emotionally. He took the incredible technical skill he got from Marxen.
That rigorous training.
Exactly. And he married it to this astonishingly broad range of historical influences. He didn't just copy them, he absorbed them. He worshipped Beethoven, had the bust watching over him while he composed.
Mm-hmm.
And near the end of his life, he apparently called Mozart the greatest composer of all. He saw tradition not as restriction, but as this incredibly fertile ground to build on.
And his own deep study of older music, Bach, Palestrina, that clearly fed into it. We talked about his counterpoint.
We did. And the sources mentioned how natural his grasp was. He could take something incredibly complex and academic, like a strict inverted canon.
Sounds dry.
Sounds dry, right?
Yeah.
But he could transform it into something purely lyrical, pure poetry. That's the magic, the fusion of brain and heart.
But he wasn't just academic, was he? There's that earthier side, too.
Absolutely not just academic. There was a raw, vital, almost worldly element in his music, too. That early exposure to Hungarian music, the so-called gypsy style, especially touring with Rennie.
That stuck with him.
It really stuck with him. It fueled his lifelong fascination with irregular rhythms, syncopation, cross rhythms, those triplet figures against duplets, that fantastic use of rubato stretching time. You hear it most obviously in the Hungarian dances, of course.
Hugely popular.
Immensely popular. Some musicologists have even compared his rhythmic complexity and innovation to Stravinsky, who came much later. It's that blend, Bach-level structure combined with this fiery, almost folk-like rhythmic energy that makes his sound so unique.
And this complexity, this tension between the scholarly brain and the raw emotional drive, it just loops right back to his extreme perfectionism, doesn't it?
It inevitably does. That self-criticism was his ultimate quality control, his filter.
His greatest tool, maybe his greatest personal burden, too.
You could definitely argue that. Destroying mountains of work, turning a symphony into a piano concerto, wrestling with the first symphony for over 20 years. This wasn't just him being hesitant. It was a relentless, almost obsessive pursuit of flawlessness.
He refused to compromise the standard he felt was set by Beethoven, by Schumann's prophecy.
Exactly. So when he finally did let a piece out into the world, you knew it had been through the fire. It was built to last. Granite.
And this intense process is precisely why someone like Schoenberg could look back and call him Brahms the progressive, right?
Right.
Even while contemporaries like Wagner were mocking him as old-fashioned.
Right. Wagner calling the First Symphony No. 10, basically dismissing it as a dull Beethoven imitation.
Why did the new German school miss that progressive side? Was it really about the music or just politics?
I think it was largely political, tied to their aesthetic agendas. They valued overt revolution, program music, music tied to literature or drama. Brahms valued evolution from within, structural integrity, purely musical drama.
So they just weren't listening for the right things.
They weren't listening for the subtle internal innovations, the way he manipulated motives, the rhythmic freedom within the structure, the sheer density and coherence of his textures. They heard the traditional forms and stopped there.
But Schoenberg heard the future.
Schoenberg heard the future in that developing variation. He saw how Brahms was showing that structure itself could be the engine of radical musical thought, constantly generating new ideas from within. He saw Brahms, ironically, paving the way for the Second Viennese School.
It's the ultimate paradox, isn't it? The man cast as the great conservative was actually laying crucial groundwork for modernism, using the strictest forms to contain and maybe even enable the most powerful emotional content.
Absolutely. Which brings us right back to the enduring drama of his life, and maybe the final question we should leave you, the listener, with.
Go on.
How much of that intense discipline, the rigid forms, the endless revisions, destroying drafts, and how much of that profound self-inflicted loneliness, avoiding marriage, that emotional holding back, how much of it was genuinely necessary? Was the unbelievable fury and passion that drives his greatest music only possible because of the elegant, incredibly strong cage he built around it?